An Air Force captain? In my pit. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, not a seminar on how to properly surrender. We break bones here, not code. The cavernous training hall, a place the Marines called the Cauldron, erupted in a wave of dutiful, rumbling laughter. The sound bounced off the padded gray walls, sharp and mocking, a chorus of masculine certainty aimed at the single, slender figure standing apart from the platoon. Captain Eva Rostova did not flinch. She did not blush. Her gaze, steady behind the thin, functional frames of her glasses, remained fixed on the instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan. Her hands, relaxed at her sides, did not clench into fists. She simply stood, a portrait of unnerving calm amidst a sea of derision, her posture a silent refutation of the insult. But across the hall, leaning against the far wall with arms crossed over his chest, Colonel Vance saw something else entirely. He saw the way her weight was perfectly distributed, a subtle centering that spoke not of weakness, but of a deep, coiled readiness. He saw the quiet economy in her stillness, a discipline that bellowed louder than any boast. If you believe that true strength is forged in silence and proven through action, type competence below. The air in the cauldron was thick with the ghosts of effort, a potent mixture of sweat, ammonia from the cleaning solvents, and the faint, metallic tang of old blood that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully erase from the worn floor mats. It was a cathedral of controlled violence, a place where raw recruits were hammered into weapons on the anvil of tradition. Tattered motivational posters showing screaming Marines grappling in mud clung to the cinder block walls, their colors faded by years of relentless Virginia sun streaming through the high, barred windows. Every scuff on the floor, every dent in the steel equipment lockers told a story of pain, endurance, and transformation. Gunnery Sergeant Gunny Sullivan was the high priest of this temple, a man carved from granite and indignation. His face was a roadmap of brawls won and bar fights foolishly started by others. His voice, a gravelly force of nature honed by 2 decades of shouting over engine roar and rifle fire, was his primary instrument of instruction and intimidation. He moved with the heavy, deliberate swagger of a man who had never once in his adult life questioned his own superiority or the righteous power of the institution he served. To him, the world was simple. There were Marines, and then there was everyone else. The arrival of an Air Force cyber warfare officer in his dojo for a 3-week joint readiness exercise was, in his view, a profound bureaucratic joke, a symptom of the military going soft, prioritizing thought over raw, physical dominance. He saw her slight frame, her neatly pressed airman battle uniform amidst a sea of woodland marpat, and saw only a liability. He saw her intellectual focus and read it as weakness. His prejudice was not personal. It was institutional, a creed passed down through generations of warriors who trusted in the strength of their fists over the complexities of a circuit board. This quiet woman, with her calm demeanor and analyst sighs, represented an encroachment of a new kind of warfare he did not understand and therefore did not respect. His public mockery was not just an insult. It was a territorial display, a reassertion of the old ways in the face of an unwelcome future. He was defending his world, and she was the unwitting invader. The gunnery sergeant paced before his assembled platoon, a predator circling his prey. His boots made heavy, authoritative thuds on the mat, each step a punctuation mark in his ongoing lecture on the perceived inadequacies of other branches. "You see, Marines," he boomed, gesturing vaguely toward Captain Rostova with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Our friends in the chair force fight a different kind of war. They fight with ergonomic keyboards and ventilates. Their biggest battlefield injury is carpal tunnel. We are here, in the cauldron, to prepare for a different reality. The reality of close quarters. The reality of when the tech fails, the comms go down, and all you have left are your hands, your training, and the warrior spirit forged in this very room." A few of the younger Marines snickered again, their confidence buoyed by their instructor's absolute certainty. They saw what he saw, a woman out of her element, an academic trespasser in a warrior's sanctuary. They saw the insignia of a captain, but filtered it through the lens of Sullivan's contempt, reducing her rank to a mere administrative title, devoid of the hard-earned authority they associated with their own leadership. The joint exercise, codenamed Operation Chimera, was designed to bridge this exact cultural gap, to integrate technical specialists like Rostova with infantry units, creating hybrid teams for the complex battlefields of the future. The memo had spoken of synergy, of force multipliers, of a need for the modern warrior to be both physically formidable and technologically astute. But to Gunny Sullivan, it was just words on a page, a politically correct fantasy concocted by generals in the Pentagon who hadn't smelled gunpowder in 30 years. His world was one of tangible threats and visceral responses. He trusted what he could see, what he could hit. And what he saw in Captain Rostova was a symbol of everything he resented. While he spoke, she continued her silent observation. Her focus was not on him, not on his words of ridicule. Her eyes moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, scanning the men before her. She wasn't just looking at them. She was deconstructing them. She noted the slight limp in a corporal's left leg, the way a sergeant favored his right side, the overeager tension in the shoulders of a young private first class. She absorbed the geometry of the room, the distances between potential threats, the locations of the exits, the hard surfaces. It was a process of passive data collection, as automatic and ingrained as breathing. Her calm was not passivity. It was a state of profound awareness. She was a living sensor array, gathering information, processing it, and storing it away without a flicker of visible emotion. This was her battlefield, too, just a different phase of it. The gunny, misinterpreting her stillness as fear or intellectual aloofness, decided to escalate. He was a teacher, after all, and he believed in the power of demonstration. He would use her to make a point his Marines would never forget. The air crackled with anticipation as Gunny Sullivan stopped his pacing directly in front of Captain Rostova, forcing the platoon's entire attention onto her. He loomed over her, a mountain of muscle and condescension, a smirk playing on his lips. "Captain," he began, his voice dripping with mock politeness, "since you're here to learn about our world, let's give you the full, immersive experience. The core of MCMAP is the principle of one mind, any weapon, but before you can make a weapon of your environment, you must first master the weapon that is your own body. Show us. Show us a basic block encounter." Corporal Davis, get up here, a young, powerful Marine, built like a fire hydrant with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, eagerly jogged to the front. He was the platoon's star pupil, a former high school wrestling champion who moved with explosive confidence. "Now, Corporal," Sullivan instructed, "I want you to execute a simple forward lunge, a straight punch. Don't hurt the captain, just demonstrate the technique." "And, ma'am," he said, turning back to Rostova, his eyes glinting, "you just do what feels natural." It was a setup, a cruel piece of theater designed for maximum humiliation. The expectation was clear. She would either flinch and back away, proving her lack of courage, or she would attempt some clumsy, ineffective block and be easily overwhelmed, proving her lack of skill. Either outcome would validate Sullivan's prejudice. Rostova, however, did something unexpected. She began a small, methodical ritual. She carefully placed her glasses into the breast pocket of her uniform blouse, the metallic click of the case snapping shut echoing in the sudden, tense silence. She took a half step back with her right foot, settling into a stance that was neither wide and aggressive nor narrow and defensive. It was something else entirely, subtle, balanced, almost relaxed. Her hands came up slowly, not in a traditional guard, but held loosely before her, palms slightly open, fingers relaxed. Colonel Vance, still watching from the back, felt a jolt of recognition. It wasn't a Marine stance. It wasn't boxing or karate. It was something fluid, something predatory. It was the ready stance of a Systema practitioner, the Russian martial art renowned for its brutal efficiency and focus on biomechanical destruction. The smirk on Sullivan's face faltered for a fraction of a second. He waved impatiently at Corporal Davis. "Go on, son. Demonstrate." The corporal lunged, his right fist a blur of motion aimed for her center mass. The room held its collective breath, bracing for the inevitable impact. But there was no impact. The collision everyone expected never happened. Instead, there was a fluid, almost imperceptible shift. As Corporal Davis's punch surged forward, Captain Rostova didn't block it. She flowed around it. She sidestepped a mere fraction of an inch, her left hand coming up not to parry the blow but to gently cup his elbow. Her right hand simultaneously found the back of his neck. It wasn't a strike. It was a touch, as light as a whisper. For an instant, the two were connected in a strange, intimate dance. Then, with a subtle pivot of her hips and a twist of her wrists, she redirected his entire forward momentum. Davis, a 200-pound man moving at full speed, suddenly found his own force being used against him. His feet left the ground. He was airborne for a split second, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face, before he landed on the mat on his back with a heavy, air-expelling thud. It was a perfect, silent throw. There was no grunt of effort from her, no triumphant shout. She simply stepped back, her hands returning to their relaxed, ready position as if nothing had happened. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. A stunned silence descended upon the cauldron. It was a silence so deep, so absolute, that the hum of the overhead ventilation system sounded like a jet engine. The Marines stared, their minds struggling to process what their eyes had just witnessed. Gunny Sullivan's jaw was slack. "Luck," he finally managed to croak out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "That was luck. 2 more. Get up here." 2 more Marines, larger than the first, hesitated for a moment before jogging forward, their earlier confidence replaced by a visible unease. They spread out, attempting to flank her. Rostova's head didn't move, but her awareness seemed to expand to encompass them both. They attacked simultaneously. The Marine on her right threw a wide, looping hook. The one on her left went low, aiming for a tackle. Again, she didn't meet force with force. She moved like water, flowing into the gap between the 2 attacks. She ducked under the hook, her shoulder making contact with the attacker's ribs. As he staggered, off balance, she used his own body as a shield against the second Marine's tackle. The 2 men collided with each other in a clumsy heap. A quick, precise strike with the edge of her hand to a pressure point at the base of the first Marine's skull, and he went limp. A simple, brutal joint lock on the second man's extended arm, and he cried out, tapping the mat in submission. 3 down. The silence in the room was now tinged with something new. Awe. Sullivan, his face now pale, his arrogance completely shattered, gestured weakly with his hand. "All of you," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "The rest of the stick. Go." 7 more Marines, the remainder of the demonstration squad, moved forward. They were no longer contemptuous. They were cautious, wary, like wolves circling a creature they did not understand. They saw the same slight, unassuming woman, but now they also saw the impossible efficiency, the effortless control. They saw a predator. The 7 Marines formed a loose semicircle, their training kicking in as they tried to use their numbers to their advantage. They didn't rush in wildly like the first few. They advanced slowly, deliberately, probing for an opening. They were a coordinated unit, a pack, and she was the solitary target. This was the scenario Gunny Sullivan had envisioned to prove her fragility, to show how a single, unsupported individual would crumble before the synchronized might of a Marine fire team. He had expected a panicked, futile defense. He was about to witness a masterclass in asymmetrical engagement. Captain Rostova remained at the center of their closing circle, her breathing even, her posture unchanged. She was the calm at the eye of a gathering storm. The first 2 attacked from the front, a coordinated high-low assault. She didn't retreat. She advanced into them. With 2 swift, economical movements, she hyperextended one man's knee with a perfectly placed sidekick and used a precise palm heel strike to the chin of the other, sending him stumbling backward into his comrades. The attack faltered. 3 more surged forward to fill the gap. She moved between them like a phantom. A thumb drove into a pressure point behind an ear, causing one Marine to seize up in temporary paralysis. An elbow, delivered with devastating torque from her hips, shattered the nose of another. A simple, elegant leg sweep took the third off his feet. She never stopped moving, each action flowing seamlessly into the next. There was no wasted energy, no theatrical flair. It was pure, distilled violence, applied with the precision of a surgeon. Each movement was a solution to a specific tactical problem. Each strike was targeted to a nerve cluster, a joint, or a vital point. She was systematically dismantling a trained combat unit, piece by piece. The remaining 2 Marines, seeing their comrades fall in seconds, hesitated. That hesitation was their undoing. She closed the distance in a blur, her hands a flurry of motion. One moment they were standing, the next they were both on the mat, one caught in a chokehold that had him frantically tapping for release, the other staring up at the ceiling, his arm twisted into an excruciating wrist lock. 10 Marines, fit, strong, and highly trained in hand-to-hand combat, were neutralized. They lay on the mat around her, groaning, gasping, or simply lying still in stunned disbelief. The entire engagement, from the first attack to the last submission, had lasted no more than 30 seconds. Captain Eva Rostova stood in the center of the defeated men, her chest rising and falling with the same calm rhythm as before. She wasn't even breathing heavily. She retrieved her glasses from her pocket, put them on with a steady hand, and adjusted them on the bridge of her nose. Then she looked directly at Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan, her expression unreadable, and waited. The only sound in the cauldron was the ragged breathing of 10 humbled Marines. The wave of laughter for minutes before seemed like a memory from another lifetime. Colonel Vance pushed himself off the wall, his movements crisp and deliberate. The sound of his polished boots clicking on the concrete floor cut through the thick, shocked silence. Every eye in the room, including Gunny Sullivan's, snapped toward him as he strode onto the training mat. He didn't look at the defeated Marines. He didn't look at the utterly dumbfounded gunnery sergeant. His gaze was fixed solely on Captain Rostova. He walked directly to her, stopping a respectful 2 feet away. He was a tall, imposing man, a decorated combat veteran whose presence commanded immediate and unconditional respect throughout the base. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Captain," he said, his tone formal and devoid of any surprise. "State your full name and designator for the record." Rostova blinked once, her composure unwavering. "Captain Eva Rostova, 17S, Cyber Warfare Operations Officer, United States Air Force, sir." Her voice was clear and steady, a simple statement of fact. "Colonel Vance Noded Sludi." He pulled a small, ruggedized tablet from a pouch on his belt. With a few swift taps of his thumb, he accessed the secure personnel database for Operation Chimera. He held the tablet up so that Gunny Sullivan, who had stumbled forward as if in a trance, could see the screen. "Gunnery Sergeant," Vance said, his voice dropping a full octave, becoming hard as iron. "You read this, out loud, for the benefit of your platoon." Sullivan stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. His eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment before he found his voice. It came out as a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Name, Rostova Eva. Rank, Captain, USAF. Primary MOS, 17S Cyber Warfare." Secondary commendations, he trailed off, his eyes scanning a list that seemed impossible. Colonel Vance's voice cut in, sharp and impatient. "Read the list." Gunny, Sullivan swallowed hard and began to read, his voice trembling slightly. "Graduate, U.S. Army Ranger School. Graduate, U.S. Navy Underwater Demolitions / SEAL Training. Inter-Service Exchange Program. Advanced Close Quarters Combat Instructor, Fort Bragg. Hand-to-Hand Combat Advisor, Israeli Defense Forces, Krav Maga Special Cadre. Mission History, Classified. Further classifications, Redacted. 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 Current temporary assignment to Operation Chimera. As a threat assessment and mitigation specialist, the list went on, a litany of elite training programs and assignments that painted a picture not of a desk-bound analyst, but of one of the most highly trained and dangerous individuals in the entire United States Armed Forces. The designation 17S was her job, but the list was who she was. She wasn't just a cyber officer who knew self-defense. She was a Tier 1 level operator who happened to specialize in cyber warfare. The room was utterly still, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone. Then Colonel Vance did something that sent a final, powerful shockwave through the platoon. He straightened his back, brought his heels together with an audible click, and rendered Captain Eva Rostova a slow, perfect ceremonial salute. "My apologies for my NCO's lack of professional courtesy, ma'am," he said, his voice ringing with profound respect. It will not happen again. The echo of the colonel's words, and the even more powerful statement of his salute, hung in the air long after he had lowered his hand. For the Marines of the platoon, it was a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. They had been taught to view the world through a rigid hierarchy of strength and toughness, a hierarchy in which they, as Marines, stood firmly at the apex. That worldview had just been publicly and spectacularly dismantled by a quiet Air Force captain they had dismissed without a second thought. The respect shown by Colonel Vance, a man they revered as the epitome of a Marine officer, was the final, undeniable validation of her skill and status. It recalibrated their entire understanding of what a warrior could be. Vance turned his steely gaze from Rostova to the still frozen gunnery Sergeant Sullivan. "Gunny," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "You have spent the last hour preaching to these young Marines about the warrior spirit. You spoke of discipline, of respect, of judging a situation before you act. You have failed to demonstrate every single one of those principles here today. You allowed your pride and your prejudice to make an assumption. A lazy, ignorant, and dangerous assumption. In a real-world scenario, an assumption like that doesn't just get you embarrassed. It gets you and everyone under your command killed." He let the words sink in, sweeping his eyes over the faces of the young Marines, ensuring they understood the gravity of the lesson. Captain Rostova is here as part of Operation Chimera because the nature of warfare has changed. The enemy is no longer just a man with a rifle. The most dangerous person on the battlefield might not be the one with the biggest muscles or the loudest voice. It might be the one who can dismantle an enemy's command and control network from a laptop, and who can also, if necessary, dismantle a 10-man kill team with their bare hands. You were presented with an opportunity to learn from an expert in this new reality. Instead, you chose to mock her. You chose ignorance over knowledge. That is a failure of leadership, Gunnery Sergeant. A profound failure. Sullivan stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of shame. He could do nothing but take the verbal barrage. He had never been dressed down like this in his entire career, let alone in front of his own men. "Yes, sir," he finally managed to say, his voice thick with humility. Colonel Vance wasn't finished. "The greatest warriors I have ever known," he continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming the voice of a mentor rather than a disciplinarian, were often the quietest. Their competence spoke for them. They didn't need to boast. They didn't need a posture. Their skill was self-evident to anyone who knew what to look for. Let today be a lesson for all of you. Respect is earned through action, not demanded by volume. And you will give Captain Rostova the respect her service and her skill have earned. Is that understood? A thunderous, unified chorus of "Yes, sir" filled the hall. The lesson had been delivered. The legend had been born. The story of what happened in the cauldron spread through the Quantico base with the speed and intensity of a wildfire. It was whispered in the Chow lines, recounted with growing embellishment in the barracks after lights out, and debated in the hushed, reverent tones usually reserved for battlefield legends. It became known simply as the Day of the Ten, or more personally, Sullivan's Folly. Every Marine who had been present became a primary source, a storyteller besieged with questions from those who hadn't been lucky enough to witness it firsthand. The narrative took on a life of its own, transforming from a simple training incident into a modern military fable. Captain Rostova became a near-mythical figure overnight. They called her the Ghost, or the Librarian, nicknames spoken with a mixture of fear and profound admiration. Marines who passed her on the base would subtly alter their course, some nodding with a newfound respect, others simply staring, trying to reconcile the unassuming woman in the neat ABU with the hyperlethal warrior from the stories. She, for her part, seemed completely oblivious to her newfound fame. She continued her work on Operation Chimera, attending briefings, writing code, and analyzing threat intelligence with the same quiet, methodical focus she had displayed on the training mat. She never mentioned the incident, never gloated, never treated Gunny Sullivan or his men with anything less than professional courtesy. Her silence, once misinterpreted as weakness, was now understood for what it was, the unshakable confidence of a true professional who required no external validation. The most significant transformation, however, was in Gunnery Sergeant Sullivan. The public humiliation could have broken a lesser man, made him bitter and resentful. But Sullivan was, at his core, a United States Marine. He was steeped in a tradition of confronting failure, learning from it, and adapting. The incident had not just shattered his arrogance, it had shattered his ignorance. It forced him to confront the limitations of his own worldview. 2 days after the incident, he approached Captain Rostova as she was leaving the secure facility where she worked. He didn't make a scene. He simply stood in her path, his posture no longer arrogant, but humbled. "Ma'am," he began, his voice quiet and strained. "I have no excuse for my behavior. I was unprofessional. I was ignorant. And I was wrong." Rostova simply looked at him, her expression neutral, and waited. "What you did in there? I've never seen anything like it," he continued, shaking his head slightly. "My men, I've been teaching them the same way for 15 years. I thought I was preparing them for anything. I see now I wasn't. I was preparing them for the last war." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to teach me. Teach my Marines. What you know. They need to know it. I need to know it." It was the ultimate admission of defeat and the most profound gesture of respect he could offer. He was asking her to take over his temple, to become the High Priestess. Captain Rostova considered Gunny Sullivan's request for a long moment, her calm gaze searching his face. She saw not the arrogant bully from the training hall, but a man genuinely humbled, a leader who had recognized a critical flaw in his own methods and was willing to do whatever it took to correct it for the sake of his men. She saw the core of the professional NCO beneath the cracked shell of his prejudice. "The first lesson is free, Gunny," she said, her voice even. "Assumptions are a liability. True strength respects all forms of competence." She then agreed to his request. For the remainder of her 3 weeks at Quantico, she spent 2 hours every evening in the Cauldron, not as a guest, but as a lead instructor. The dynamic was completely transformed. The Marines, once a source of mockery, were now her most diligent and respectful students. They hung on her every word, their eagerness to learn palpable. She didn't teach them complex, flashy techniques. She taught them principles: economy of motion, situational awareness, the physics of leverage, the psychology of violence. She taught them to see the human body not as a solid mass, but as a collection of systems that could be disrupted and controlled. Her teaching style was as efficient and direct as her fighting. She spoke in short, precise sentences, demonstrating a technique once, and then having the Marines drill it until it was ingrained in their muscle memory. She corrected their form with a quiet touch, a subtle adjustment to a hand or a foot that made all the difference. Gunny Sullivan became her primary student, absorbing the lessons with a fierce intensity. He had her demonstrate the takedowns on him again and again, wanted to understand not just the mechanics, but the feeling of that effortless, irresistible control. The spot on the mat where she had first stood, the place where she had dismantled his 10 best men, became a kind of unofficial landmark. The Marines started calling it Rostova's Circle. It became a point of reference during training. "Reset at Rostova's Circle," Sullivan would command. It was no longer just a piece of padded floor. It was a symbol. Captain Rostova, the quiet professional, was changing the culture of the base, not through orders or rank, but through the simple, undeniable power of her demonstrated competence. Months later, long after Captain Rostova's temporary assignment had ended and she had returned to the shadowy world of cyber warfare, her legacy endured at Quantico. The Cauldron was a different place. The atmosphere of brute force and inter-service rivalry had been replaced by a more thoughtful, more comprehensive approach to combat readiness. Gunny Sullivan stood before a new platoon of young Marines, their faces a mixture of apprehension and eagerness. He was still the same physically imposing figure, but his demeanor had changed. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet authority that was far more commanding. He began his introductory speech, the same one he had given for years, but the words were different now. "Welcome to the Cauldron," he began, his voice a low rumble. "In this room, you will learn how to fight. You will learn the techniques of the Marine Corps martial arts program. You will become proficient in control violence. But the most important lesson you will learn here has nothing to do with a punch or a kick. The most important lesson is about respect." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the new recruits. "Some months ago, in this very room, I made a mistake. I saw a uniform from another service. I saw a person who didn't look like what I thought a warrior should look like. and I made an assumption. I judged them based on my own ignorance, my own prejudice. And I was humbled. Your job is to learn from anyone who has something to teach, regardless of their rank, their branch, or your own foolish pride. The story had become institutional folklore, a foundational parable for every Marine who passed through Sullivan's training. His graduates were not only better fighters, they were smarter, more adaptable leaders, better equipped for the complexities of modern joint operations. The legend of Rostova's Circle became a case study at officer training schools, a simple but powerful narrative about the dangers of cognitive bias on the battlefield. The story served as a constant reminder that competence is the only currency that truly matters, and it can be found in the most unexpected of places. The true legacy of Captain Eva Rostova wasn't the 10 Marines she defeated in 30 seconds. It wasn't the fear or awe she inspired. It was the change she catalyzed in others. It was in a gunnery sergeant who learned humility and became a better teacher. It was in a platoon of Marines who learned to see beyond the uniform and respect the skill within. It was in an institution that was reminded that its greatest strength lies not in its adherence to tradition, but in its ability to adapt and evolve. True legacy isn't something you leave behind like a monument of stone. It is what continues to move forward in the actions and beliefs of those you've influenced. It's a lesson learned, a perspective shifted, a standard raised. Captain Rostova never sought recognition, and she never received a medal for what she did that day. She wouldn't have wanted one. Her reward was the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, of a problem identified and solved with quiet, devastating efficiency. Her work continued in the silent, invisible world of signals and code, but her legend lived on in the grunts and shouts of a training hall in Quantico, a permanent lesson etched into the culture of the United States Marine Corps. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.